3, 2, 1. We are live. Welcome, people. Welcome to Aion, the exploration of deep space. Oh, and it's now recording in my background. The exploration of deep space, psychic space, the space within the mind. I am here with Cosmonaut, Jimi, Donavich. How are you, Jimi?
I am incredibly well, Stefan. I'm very excited about my elevation within NASA. I realize NASA does no longer lie, so I decided to join them. How are you today, sir?
I am great. Getting ready to venture into the depths of the psyche and what triggers us to make our profound moral decisions. As always, we're going to jump into Aion and talk about symbols and the conscience, the voice within your head, and how that may relate to, dare I say it, the old big G himself, God's voice. Who knows? Who knows what is that thing inside of us that tells us what is right and wrong? Nonetheless, I'm feeling good. I had a coffee there a while ago where we're just talking about dream reading, how we're going to work away through getting our Discord in order, and perhaps have something very cool for you coming soon. Jungian dream reading, something I took very serious for a long time. I guess that's a good way to get into what will probably be the theme of these next couple of paragraphs, because I think we're going to make it through a lot more paragraphs than we did last time. I was, when I started out reading Jung, I was really looking for a way to get back in touch with what you call a spiritual mode of being, a mode of being that connects you to something bigger. Considering that I grew up in a very materialistic, anti-religious world, like both my parents were essentially atheists and I didn't believe in anything. And so Jung really struck me because he suggested that your dreams are real. And people were like, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, most people would be like, dreams are bullshit. There's just your mind having a schizophrenic spaz as it's trying to figure out if you're going to get eaten by lions and all that. But Jung was saying that dreams are literally part of your mind, almost like they're sending you advice in a very profound way. They're sending you symbols that can guide you that are quite useful. And so I took that serious and I started to work with the dreams, and I started to see what the dreams were bringing to me. And I found out that they were bringing me patterns that, if I distilled, would give me insight. Now, this is an astounding fucking idea, because when you think about it, you have this part of your mind, the conscious mind, that's here now when you're awake. And when that turns off, there's a part of you that can talk to you, that is intelligent and can even give you insight about life. So that means there's something inside of you that is what we call smart, that is not the thing that you consider the source of all smartness and rationality, which is your conscious ego. So fucking crazy. So crazy. So the question is, what is that thing that's speaking to you? What is that deep symbol producing thing? And Jung would frame it as, at the very bottom of that is something you call the self. And even when you dig deeper into that, you'll find that self connects with everybody else's self in some metaphysical space. It's so crazy, the old collective unconscious. So you're connected to something really, really big, and it produces symbols to move you through the world. And the more I've done stuff like read the Bible properly and read into and look at how giant artistic projects and dreams work, is that it seems like symbols have sort of got a life of their own to some extent, and you're connecting to that through your dreams. It really makes you think, what is this intelligent operating force behind it all? And the conscience is a little part of that. The conscience is, well, it's a big part of that. It's that thing where you've got your reasoning in your head, you're explaining to yourself what you're doing in life, and then suddenly a problem comes up, and a little voice combined with a feeling comes across in your head and nibbles at you and makes you feel weird and worried about whether what's right and wrong, what's the right thing to do, what's the wrong thing to do. A good example of this is Dostoevsky's what's the name of it? Crime and Punishment, where the guy, he rationalizes killing an old granny because she's just a useless old granny. But then the rest of the novel is about his conscience, this other part of his mind, perhaps coming from this dream part of his mind, reaches out and starts chewing away at his reasonable mind, and it breaks him down. And that's a very strange problem. There's two things inside of him that are warring, and one of them is a deeper, subtle, but powerful part, and another is a more reasoned, arrogant part. The
dream reading stuff. In fact, you were reading your dreams, it was telling you this stuff. This is, I never understand this about materialists, who, I guess, Sam Harris types, or maybe not Sam Harris, but where they think all the world around you is just purely material. And then I wonder what they think of about the third of their life they spend asleep, you know, I imagine Sam Harris, when he closes his eyes, probably some of it's sophisticated and the rest of it is like having sex with the most attractive women ever. You know, whilst reading his books on a beach somewhere. And it's like, you spend a third of your life in some mystical realm. And if you actually pay attention to it, it tells you what's going on in your life, which is an incredibly, incredibly weird thing. So of course we know this from biology, that there's so much information in the world, your senses will detect it, but you won't bring it into your head. Like right now, I'm looking at you, Stefan. I'm not looking at my fan there or my spare bed here or whatever. Sensory overload. So you're only focusing on one thing, but it's still coming through you. So it's like, what else is picking up on that stuff? So your dreams is almost like, okay, you're in my waking life. I've gotten through the day and I've survived. And then you go to sleep for a third of your life, and the rest of whatever the hell is in your head, these autonomous forces, is like, this is what you've missed, and this is what you've missed, and this is what you really feel. But it doesn't give it to you in words, because you have to play its game, not the other way around. It's like, here's your life in the form of symbols. Figure it out yourself. It's a riddle. You know, like I guess that could be like an archetypal riddle, where it gives it to you and it's like, solve this. And actually, you've got to have the curiosity first to want to go solve it. It's like, solve it, and then your life will become so much better. So it's like, dream reading is unbelievably powerful. My dreams recently have been so biblical in nature. One of them was, I had this blood-soaked tunic of a dead English saint, and I was cuddling it. And I was like wearing it like a little Batman cape and running around with it. You know, I could feel it. It was so comforting. And I woke up and was like, the fuck is this? Why am I cuddling this old bloody relic? Literally bloody. But it played on a theme that has been going through my mind the last little while, of martyrdom and standing up for what I believe in, and how that's a great comfort that the people before me have gone and lived those lives. So it's like, thank you dreams, thank you self, thank you whatever is picking up on this stuff and telling me. It's a great comfort, incredibly useful.
And and that's what I've found very profound about them, is that they sort of are like it's almost like you're living this life and you've got all these tones to your reality. Like there's these conflicts that are playing out in your head on a conscious level. But then the dreams is like when you dig all the way down to the very bottom of the river and find out what's the actual deep currents that are driving these subtle tones at the top. It's almost like you're listening to the melody up here, but dreams bring you all the way down into the deep rhythmic harmonies and the roots of what's going on. And if you can bring those to consciousness, they can somehow enhance the richness of the experience. It texturizes the whole thing properly. And so in some sense, you might be going through a conflict now of, I don't know, whatever is going on in your life, and there's all these emotions. And then when you can dig into the idea of this blood-soaked tunic and connect it to some historical figure, you're like, holy shit, it all makes sense as a big picture. And as Jung says, like, full integration is this experience of every moment being charged with an immense amount of meaning. And that is the dreams. The dreams have this ability to do something like that. And it all leads into this idea of, well, what the fuck is underneath the dreams, man? What is going on there? It's very, very profound. But let's get into the text, sir. Would you like to do some reading?
I would love to do some reading.
Excellent.
I hope you're all sitting comfortably, of course. Get yourself a bag of popcorn, some barbecue sauce, whatever the Americans put on their popcorn. We are on page 26, halfway down paragraph 49. The inner authority does not need to be consulted first, as it is present at the outset in the intensity of the tendencies struggling for decision. In this struggle, the individual is never a spectator only. He takes part in it more or less voluntarily and tries to throw the weight of his feeling of moral freedom into the scales of decision. Nevertheless, it remains a matter of doubt how much his seemingly free decision has a causal and possibly unconscious motivation. This may be quite as much an act of God as any natural cataclysm. The problem seems to me unanswerable, because we do not know where the roots of the feeling of moral freedom lie, and yet there exists no less surely than the instincts which are felt as compelling forces. I reckon there's a compelling force in you, Stefan, to sort of let some boyo wisdom out.
The old boyo wisdom. It's just like free cocaine.
That's what Jung's saying. Free cocaine, free heroin.
So one thing I was throwing out there is the idea that these dreams paint your reality. There's that big problem of of you having a connection to something really, really deep that actually can play with your emotions. So when you steal, you will get guilt no matter what. Something in you will start to probe at your sensitive, psychic inner world that cannot be protected. You cannot build muscle around your psyche. Your psyche will always be able to get invaded by moral violations. And so something in you will start to get prodded. You'll be like, whoa, fuck, I'm doing something wrong. Guilt will come at you. And so the question there becomes is that, are you really, like, is there a free will per se? Like if you murder someone and no matter what happens, you're going to feel the guilt about that. Are you really free in a sense that you can actually do stuff? You can actually choose to do things? Or are you completely dictated by your emotional boundaries, which seem to be unconsciously dictated? Like you will, if you're the type of person to obey people and you'll feel guilty or shameful when you try to go your own way or something like that, maybe you're imprisoned by your personality. And can you, and if that's all coming from the deep unconscious, can you even say that you're a free person? And then that's that challenge I think Jung is presenting here, is that there does seem to be this ego that we have, this reason, this rational character, which is this conscious character, where I can violate my natural guilt towards stealing, and I can wrestle with that, and I have a free will to do that. The question is, how does that work? And why does it seem that when you're trying to reason through a decision, you're trying to think logically, is it right to steal or not? That's not the real problem. The real problem is you're trying to deal with the energetic force that comes out of that. When you steal, when you sin, if you will, it causes a emotional response, a conscience-based response, a inner violation of sorts, a fear, a guilt of some sort. And that's an emotion. You're dealing with a instinct. It's like a god. You're dealing with a power of sorts. And so is conscious freedom, is free will more about this sort of emotional intelligence of sorts? Is it about, as we said before, is it about the type of god you worship? It's a very interesting idea. Any thoughts on that, sir?
Yeah. What came to mind there was this idea of Catholic guilt, almost, because like you'll have lots of like young people brought up in fundamental Christian households, and then they'll like break away from the church and go off and live their own life, but they still can't seem to bring it in themselves to have sex with people or to masturbate or any kind of sexual fornication, degeneracy stuff. They can't do it. And when you ask them why, they're like, oh, it's just this old Catholic guilt. And they use that as an excuse to be like, well, I was programmed by this. And it's like, I'm not so sure that's true, because if you can say God no longer exists and you can get rid of most of it, why can't you pass out some of it? Some things seem to remain embedded so deep within you that if you go and you do an action which something inside you says is wrong, then you feel guilt and shame. And it's not the best. This is why Jung said the best way to talk about this is the will of God idea. It's like there is an omnipresent judging force within your brain that's always there, and it's fundamental to every single thing that you're doing. So it's like, where are your choices coming from? They're not quite evolutionary instincts, because your evolutionary instinct would be steal, or go to a different shop and steal, or completely change your chain of store and steal. Something like that, right? It wouldn't be, I can never steal again because it's wrong. You know, and you can say, well, maybe he just put the fear into me. It's like, well, yeah, of course he scared you. He scared you. It's like, surely you could go somewhere else and do a similar thing. Now, people do this all the time, but they turn out to be like psychopathic, sociopathic types. They lack this judge. It's almost like they're completely atheistic. You want to think about it like that. But where there is always this moral instinct in your head, and it says, do that. And if you don't, it's like, well, you're feeling shame. But you only normally feel shame in real life when you're being ostracized, or if someone disapproves of you. In which case, who is this somebody who you feel disapproved towards? It's like, is it another side of you? Yeah, but then like, where is it and what is it? And it's why it's this eternal God idea.
Oh shit, I just had such an idea. Oh my God. Okay, hopefully it's as profound as it seemed in my head. Let me try this out here. So that really sparked something super interesting, because Nietzsche then fronts the idea that there is no such thing as a pure morality. Morality is relative. So I'm going to play with that for a sec. You have that idea of the Catholic guilt. You get programmed to fear sex. And then when you go out and you have abundant sex, the guilt shows up. And it's like, oh, well, I was just programmed that way, you know? I was programmed that way. But nonetheless, there is a part of you that is geared towards feeling shame. And that's there. Now, what you program that thing to be shame towards, perhaps that's relative, but the instinct towards shame and guilt is there. It's real. You can't stop people feeling shame and guilt. It's a part of who you are. It's a part of the human experience, and it's actually like a very important part as well. And so the question then becomes, and this is this idea in Nietzsche, is that we frame things as negative, and we can call them evil, we can call them good, we can call them evil or bad or something like that. But the real question is, whoever can control the programming can decide what you frame as negative. So priests would be like, oh, strong, sexy people, they're evil. And then strong, sexy people would be like weak, degenerate priests are evil. You have the same instinct being applied to different things in life, and that controls your behavior. So the question, and a good example of this is in the modern world, you'll have many people who are secular, and they would have no problem fucking anybody. They would just like, you just fuck everything and everything. Like it's just a pure, it's like a sausage sex fest going on, a pure orgy. Like the modern world is sort of like that. It's abundant sexuality. But if you went up to someone and said, races are different, the races are different, they'd be like, oh my God, you should be that's disgusting. You're disgusting. So there's this really, really weird thing where the same energy, the same disgust, the same moral instinct is now applied to a different stimuli. So if you go to someone modern and say sex is good, so race is good and sex is bad, they'll be like, you're literally evil. But if you go to someone in the Victorian age and say, like, race, are there different races? They would all be like, of course, it's so obvious, and some are way better than others. Like they would, they would all be like, Europeans are way better than Asians. They was just the way they thought back then. They'd be like, Europeans are different than Africans, and it would be all that superiority stuff would all be part of that, the whole Darwinian thing. But then if you say, oh, I just had sex with someone last night, and they'd be like, was it your wife? And it's like, no. And it's like, what are you, like, that's disgusting. That's filthy. You probably have syphilis, man. What the fuck? So there's this really weird same moral instinct within them, but it's applied to different things. I'm reading through the Bible. The Bible is quite funny because you have God and he's sort of like this boyo. He's sitting around there and he's like, all right, look it. Don't fuck people up the ass. Like, just don't do that. And don't kill your babies, and especially don't eat them. And then the Israelites are like, all right, dude. All right. And then they're like, just do this. Here's Moses. He'll give you a set of rules. Just do those rules. You'll be grand. And so they apply the instinct of shame towards, like sodomy and eating babies. And then they apply the instinct of pride towards Moses's rules. And then they build up great civilizations because they follow this they follow this programming, if you will. And then what happens is they get all cocky, and then they're like, sweet, we've got a great kingdom now. And then someone says, do you think we should just like, eat a baby? And they're like, dude, like God says you shouldn't do that. And they're like, just eat one baby. Sorry, I'm here knocking.
Yeah, I was going to say like God knocking on your door or something.
He's like, Stefan, don't tell them. Don't tell them. He's like, yeah, let's eat a baby. And then he's like, what the fuck? But they're like, let's eat a baby. And then everybody's like, nah. And then they're like, yeah. And then they try it once and they're like, oh, look, nothing happened. And then they keep eating babies. And then eventually they're now at a point where it's like eating babies is good. And being stringent, having those moral rules is all evil. And so what happens then is that they are now the opposite. Their moral instinct is applied to the rules of Moses. They're like, that's disgusting and pathetic and close-minded. Whereas eating babies is all like sexy and free, and sodomy, it's all being all loose and playing and all that. Now, what's interesting is they frame that in the Bible. God says you're worshiping disgusting. He calls it disgusting. You're worshiping disgusting God. You're worshiping a different God. Baal is usually who it was, or Moloch. That's a different God. So God is saying you should be worshiping me, because if you have your moral instincts aligned with my rules, you will build a great civilization. And that proves to work in the Bible. Every time they do that, they get a great kingdom. And every time they start worshiping Baal and their moral instincts flip, so instead of obeying Moses' laws, they're now obeying the whole eating baby laws, Baal's laws. Because Baal says, I want child sacrifice. That's what Baal says. He says, I need you to kill children and let the priests eat them. That's how you worship me. And when they start obeying that and they apply their instincts to that and they allow that to happen, the whole fucking civilization collapses. And God always comes down to him in prophets and says, look at you fucking degenerates. I told you, obey Moses, don't eat any babies. If you keep eating babies, I will send the Assyrians over and they will wipe you the fuck out. And everybody's like, oh, you're so judgmental. That's so, you're so stringent. You're so, what the fuck? You're so uptight, God. And God's like, all right, fuck it then. Assyrians, go get them. And then they go in, they just murder everyone. And God's like, yeah, I told you. I actually told you. Like, what the fuck? Like, it's so simple. I really hate you guys. And that's pretty much the story of the Bible. He's like, for fuck's sake, you're such dicks. But then I kind of like you as well. So it's a weird play. And it seems to be that whole playing with the moral instincts of sorts and what violates shame and what works and all that. It's a really interesting idea I'm playing with now. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna push you on that a little bit because I might put you into a corner. It'd be very fun to see you have that on air. First of all, I want you to go back and retitle this video "Eating Babies is Sexy." I think that would work for really good clickbait. People really like that. So are you saying that inside everybody there is a will to eat babies, including you?
And
also, I'm not quite sure. I completely get your point, but I'm not entirely sure it was necessarily just eating babies. Because I was listening to John Peterson and Sam Harris thing. I was just catching up with them, and he was saying like life is so brutally tough, and like child sacrifice wasn't just killing children for the pagan gods. Child sacrifice was I mean, you had this baby and you can't look after it in your family, so you have to go and kill it, and it's so hard. I much prefer your frame because it's just like someone like Judah goes, "Gonna go eat a baby." Such a different frame.
Well, I'm obviously exaggerating, but I more mean that the what happens is it starts with you sacrificing your children and all that shit, and God comes in and says, I do not want animal sacrifice, I want kindness. And the idea is that if you apply the moral instinct towards pride, reward, I guess it's the idea of you apply that moral instinct towards I sacrifice myself for the good, and so you'll start sacrificing animals for the good, even your children for the good of life. And then at some point God says, no, just sacrifice your instinct to be a dickhead for good, be kind. And then that will, trust me, if you do that, if you get a load of people doing that, you'll build a civilization, no problem. That's pretty much what the Bible is sort of saying with God. He's like, just sacrifice your instinct to being a prick to me. And then they do that to build a civilization. But then what happens is they start saying, well, what is good is pleasure. So we'll sacrifice God's laws for pleasure. And then for some reason that leads you back downhill, eventually to the point where you're like, look, we've had all that, we had loads of heterosexual sex. Now it's time we start getting into the old sodomy a bit more again. Like, that's class. It's so pleasurable. And then what happens is the nihilism spiral goes deeper and deeper. And then eventually they're like, babies, man, let's just, like, I don't know, kill a baby, like, see what happens. Like, it's kind of cool. And dude, like, I know it sounds intense, but if you look in Aleister Crowley and all that, the whole magical side of things, the occult and all that, they talk about the power of taking a child's life. It's supposed to be an incredible, like, you can kill a kid and then drink its blood, and the adrenaline you get from that is supposed to be a high. Not that I've fucking tried that shit, but I've read the books and they talk about that. And Alistair is saying, get a young kid. He has to be a beautiful kid as well. Like, because there's a really twisted feeling of finding something that is innocent, perfect, beautiful, like a beautiful child, so much potential, and destroying it and consuming it afterwards. There's a sick, twisted power in that. The same way as that you can even feel it sometimes in the sexual experience, where there's like the masculine feminine dynamic is about dominating the feminine to some extent, and women like that as well. And there's these energies that are really intense that we don't understand, and when you play into them, they give you these really strange experiences, and those ones are okay because they're very healthy and natural. But then this is a sort of like a slightly violent experience. So when you've gone down that path where you've loosened up your morals enough that you can, like, start having sodomy sex, then you're down to the next level. You're like, okay, well, what's the deep? How can we go hardcore into this? How can we get even deeper power and all that? And that's where you start getting weird about it, because it happens. And I know it sounds weird, but if you look at what's going on in the modern world, they started off with and I don't have anything against homosexuality. Like, I think gay people are cool. I've met some really cool gay people, but it went gay marriage, and now it's like abortions, and now it's like late term abortions, and it's like we're actually going that direction and shit. So you're like, what are people worshiping? And God has died, so God is out the window now. And it's like they're going through that pattern again. And what is happening? Well, one thing that you'll notice is psychologically everybody's like, this is moral, this is immoral, and moral is accepting and being open, liberal, and free, and the moment, and hedonism. And immoral is being stringent, conservative, naughty, restrictive, old school. Like, can you imagine going out in the public space and saying, I would like to ban sodomy and abortions? You'd get castrated. You'd get absolutely chastised. And it's so strange, man. You've just completely flipped full circle. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's more about gradient scales, and I was just trying to be funny.
No, definitely. Point received for sure. You reminded me there of like, there must only be a certain number of principles, I think, in existence. There's not an infinite number, or at least like the basis level. There's a certain number, and then if you put forward an action, it's going to be grounded within an underlying principle. It has to be, right? You can't just have an action in isolation, right? It's like, so like, I'm going to go for a run. There's not an action. There is a principle underneath it, driven by either I want to look cool, or I want to have sick calf muscles, or I want to get fit. There's always a principle underneath actually really guiding you. So you've got to be really careful about that. So and this is why, yeah, exactly. So a lot of the Christian types were really concerned about gay marriage, for example, not because they didn't want homosexuals to get married. That's not what they were saying. It's like there's an underlying principle about the sacred nature of marriage and the family, and then it's like, this is one piece in a future cascade. We haven't run the gay marriage experiment, we'll say, for long enough to see which one of them is true. But it's like, it is weird on, say, we'll say the homosexual front, because obviously it started off like, we'll accept homosexual people. It's like, wonderful. I think we can all agree with that. But then now, like when I used to go out last year, it's now seemed to have become, unless you kiss men, you're a homophobe. Yeah. I think I've told a story, so I won't tell the actual story, but basically the idea was, I was just drinking with a few boys, and this happened multiple times, and it's like, we'd be dared, why don't you kiss your friend there? And I'd be like, nah, I'm not into men. And they'd be like, no, you don't even have to like fuck them. It's just like why don't you kiss them? It's a fucking joke. I'm like, I'm not doing this. I don't want to. So you're now a homophobe. So I have this reputation as being one of the most stuck up people known to mankind, because I wouldn't tongue kiss men. So it's like, if that's where we are now, where's the end result of that? It's like, well, unless you wake up in the morning and have anal sex with other men, then you are a homophobe and we must hang you. It's like, you can see the logic, dude. You can see it flowing. So what's the principle under all this stuff, And hence the concern of some people.
I've heard people flip that to so many hilarious extremes, because then someone will say, I don't want to kiss the guy. And it's like, oh, are you gay or something? Are you afraid of doing it because you'll turn gay? You must be actually gay. And then the people who do it aren't gay. And then you're like, wait a second, what is going on? I am so headfucked. The person who won't do it is secretly gay because they're repressing their gay instinct. And the people who do are comfortable with their sexuality. You've probably heard that before. It's like, I'm comfortable with my sexuality. I can like kiss a guy. It's because it's like...
I'm so comfortable in my sexuality. I have sex with men all the time, and I'm not gay.
That's just so funny, man. It's just so it's exactly what I'm talking about. The moral instincts, you are programmed a certain way, and they get moved. And so the problem is, like, we would imagine that the morality has to be applied to one thing, but it seems like it can be programmed. And so the more sophisticated question, I think this is what Nietzsche points to us. And Jung says it as well. Jung does not say that there's an objective set of morals. He's sort of saying that the true morality is someone who can deal with their psyche properly. And then you have to ask the question, all right, are you able to choose what are the right principles to obey? Because you've been conditioned a certain way. Can you overcome that and decide for yourself, or come to understand what your unconscious craves for? And then if you do that, you might find that there are a certain set of principles that lead you towards a more beneficial life. And that's, I think, Nietzsche's assertion as well, is that people read Nietzsche wrong. They think that Nietzsche's turning around and saying God is dead, so there are no morals anymore, and the true person will create their own morality. So what a lot of people are being like is that Nietzsche just says a free for all, which is actually the nihilism he warns against. I think he's coming at this idea that we do need a new set of principles, Masculinity is all about principles. But the question is, which principles do we choose? What do we apply our moral shame to? And Nietzsche's framing that the masters, the true masters, would apply moral shame towards weakness, as they did in the past, but they'd also have the elaborate long-term planning that the slave-like Jews and Christians would have, that masters lacked. Masters were just sort of instinctive, and so they were very easy to take over. As he said, the slave morality always wins because it plays the long game and it has the majority on its side. But could we play the long game and also be masters with abundant principles by creating our own morality? It's a big, big and fantastic question.
Just one last thing, I guess. Then we'll move on with the text. I'm thinking about that Catholic guilt thing again, and obviously the argument always is, if you've been programmed to be a Christian, now you're free. As if what they've done is they've taken that programming off, and as if this is the way humans are supposed to be, and this is the correct way. That way is evil. But it's like, as far as back as I can remember, being completely and utterly liberal and free is what was taught to us. It wasn't deprogram Christianity and let you go on your merry way. It was deprogram from Christianity. Now you must have sex with everything that moves, or not in so many words, but it's like, now you are free to do whatever. So what they did is they flipped the principle without actually telling you that they've given you another one. So if you frame it like that, it's like, okay, Christianity has programmed you to be one way, sure. So society programmed you to be another way. So if we're going to go people use this metaphor all the time, unplug from the matrix, deprogram. It's like, now what? And then most people, I guess all people technically, will get stuck and be like, well, I don't really know what to do now. It's like they'll be pulled one way and pulled another way. But what Jung is suggesting is, okay, now you've deprogrammed from everything, I guess. You have no outside masters. Go into your own head and what does it say? And from doing this, I've realized that I do not have a liberal psyche whatsoever. like I cannot get away with a single solitary thing. It's like confession for me would be an incredibly beautiful thing, preferably every day, where I can go in and be like, okay, I know specifically 25 areas I messed up on over the last 24 hours. Because if I make a mistake, my psyche will not let me get away from it. Because I know that mine is an incredibly ordered, conservative psyche. Maybe for other people, it is more liberal. They are more exploratory. And maybe there are different modes of being between different people. And that's what makes us beautiful and unique and blah, 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 blah. But it's like, don't try and tell me that like I have to go and be free and explore everything. I know what my psyche is telling me to do. I have to live by ordered principles or else I am depressed. It's like you have to, and only you can figure that out for yourself. But then a deeper question is like, maybe there are a few or one, something like that, underlying principles for everybody. That core piece of God,
that's a big question,
is in everybody, and you cannot dispense with that. And so what is that? And I think what Jung is implying is essentially, and what the Bible is implying as well, if you take that as an authority, is truthful speech. So it's something about you cannot cuck to somebody else. You have to speak words that you mean, and if you don't, then you're in big trouble.
Yep. Like that's a very interesting observation, because it's so great to bring this work and make it as tactile and practical as possible, like James is just doing there. Is that idea of looking into your mind and realizing that you can't, like, you have a conservative mind. That's really important to get into, because I definitely have a highly liberal mind, I believe. Like I am very, very anti rules. I hate that stuff. But at the same time, it's not like I'm anti principles, I've noticed. And last night, for example, I was having a cigarette and I decided to have a second one, and I knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway. And I felt such a tinge of guilt afterwards. And I was like, the reason why I knew it was wrong is because I almost said on principle that I'm not going to go down that path and get addicted. And so I violated that principle. It seemed like nothing at the time. I was just like, it's only one. But I lost out to the emotion. And I was like, you filthy cuck. And I knew it. And there was that feeling in me. And I was like, shit. And that was that little conscience. And maybe the conscience isn't sort of giving me a set of rules, but it's saying, look at motherfucker. If you're going to have principles, stick to them. Because every time you violate those principles, you violate your fucking soul. And so your conscience, that voice of God, if you will, might not be asking you for very specific. It might not be asking you for a very specific set of rules, even though it does in stuff like the Bible. Maybe if you're like, you want to be more free and you want to move away from that stuff, and that's fine. If you're in that part of your life, like, I don't want to Bible bash you, and I'm saying that's got all the answers, but it still asks you for principles. And I've never seen anybody lose out from having principles, because principles involve discipline, and discipline grounds you. Discipline gives meaning to your life, and your psyche itself will use your emotions to control your discipline. Like that time, you know, you got to go to the gym, but you're cooking to this little comfort feeling. I can almost personify that in my mind as like beta male self, you know, your little chode self, and it's been like, be a little bitch, degenerate. It's like two destinies get presented up. You see the like strong one that deals with difficulty, and that's the one that, you know, on principle you should go for. It's almost attached to your logos. It's what your head is sort of saying, perhaps. But then you've got this like emotional self, which is like the little cooked, feminized version, and you're getting presented with that in these moments. And if you choose one, it's that moral slide that leads you down to eating babies, man. It's the same direction, you know. And the question is, maybe the principles that we should all follow aren't there. Maybe there is no objective morality. Maybe there is. We don't know. Maybe there isn't. But the first step is always about going into your psychology and learning how to have principles with yourself. And they may be arbitrary, but it's about developing the psychological strength. I guess this is Jung's frame, is that more important than having rules, but rules are important, but more important than having rules for everybody in society is having a culture of psychological health in terms of building people's own discipline. This is the individuation process. This is what will make you stronger and more worthwhile. And I actually think the Christian story pushes people this direction a lot. It's the Torah and all that, like that's very, very much, these are the rules, but Christ is a little bit more pushing you in your head this way. But people like Jung abstract it even more and say this is a actual set of paths. This is a strategy for you to become a useful person, and it is about fighting those inner principles. I think it's fascinating.
Beautiful words, beautiful. 100% agree. 100%.
Thank you very much, people.
I reckon we should try and get through more than one paragraph today.
Yes, tear ahead, sir.
Cool.
And people, by the way, questions.
Sick. All in all, it is not only more beneficial but more correct psychologically to explain as the will of God the more natural forces that appear in us as instincts. In this way, we find ourselves living in harmony with the habitus of our ancestral psychic life. That is, we function as man has functioned at all times and in all places. The existence of this habitus is proof of its viability. For if it were not viable, all those who obeyed it would long since have perished of maladaptation. On the other hand, by conforming to it, one has reasonable life expectancy. When an habitual way of thinking guarantees as much as this, there is not only no ground for declaring it incorrect, but on the contrary, every reason to take it as true or correct in the psychological sense. Psychological truths are not metaphysical insights. They are habitual modes of thinking, feeling, and behaving, which experience has proved appropriate and useful. There you go. They got through a whole other paragraph. It's fantastic.
That's fucking crazy, dude. I actually am dizzy from the speed. Jesus. Do you want me to crack into that briefly?
Crack into it. Go for it.
I think this is essentially what we're talking about here, is that people get too caught up in the whole objective morality, the whole, oh, we can't have a we can't use religious language to talk about the psychology. Like, it's almost like that's off the table because God is dead, the universe is empty, and science is real, and there is no God, and there is no symbols. They're all superstitious imagination shit, and dreams aren't real. Whereas Jung is sort of saying that, look, if you conceptualize your reality this way, if you can conceptualize your reality this way, it helps you to think in a psychological way that will lead you to maximum health. And that's valuable. That's something that we really can't just dismiss, because it evolved this way and it worked, and that's why it stuck with us. It's something that habitually worked. And you may think, oh, it's the wrong way of looking at the world. The world is empty and the sky is empty and all that. But instead, Jung is saying conceptualizing the world as having a God in the sky has been so useful that to just dismiss it based on the fact that it doesn't match your objective evidence is not a good enough grounds to, it's not a justified way of doing it. Like, because it worked in the past, it's still valuable, and you have to take that into consideration. Maybe you don't totally believe in it. But this is something Jordan Peterson did a fantastic job of saying. He really brought the idea of the phenomenological reality, the phenomenological truth. You may as well pretend that God is real and imagine that he's real and that he's like the collective will of the society you're taking part in and all that stuff. And if you do pretend that there's someone watching you all the time, you act in a way that leads you towards maximum health. If you do pretend that there's an all-seeing eye, you sort of act in a way that stops you from doing probably the things that slide you towards the whole baby eating behavior.
Yep. It's so I'm going to give, I guess, insights into my life, because it might be a better way of explaining than I could do otherwise. It's like, so last week I had a presentation to give, and I was actually really nervous for this because, well, for multiple reasons, we'll say, and I was like shaking with fear, like the night before, and then in the morning it was getting worse and worse until, you know, when you're really nervous or something, you can really start to feel it. It's like this sense of doom. And then what I would always do in the past was try and rationalize it. And I'd be like, okay, why are you scared? What's the worst that could happen? But anyone who's tried that, it never works, or else no one would be scared of anything. It's just, well, what's the worst that could happen? Stop being anxious. No, that didn't work. So I've recently gotten into Christianity properly. And I was like, okay. I listen to like Southern Baptist preachers all the time now, because they're so powerful the way they speak. Like, the Lord will take care of you. Listen to the Lord. I'm like, okay, I will listen to the Lord. So I decided I went to a little church near where I work, and I sat down and I started to pray. Not just arbitrary praying, but I was like, okay, God, I can't do this. Like I can go through and feel this fear, but if there's anything that you could possibly do to get rid of this, even though you've given me so much already, please do so. Please, I need this. And then then you know, it's not so much bargaining with him, but being like, I swear that this is how I will be from now on if you give me this. Immediately, the fear disappeared. And I was like, this is so weird. Like, I didn't feel fear whatsoever. And I was like, okay. And then I tested it, and I started to think about the event that was coming up to try and see if that would trigger anxiety. Nope, gone. Completely gone. Like, that's weird. And I went into the presentation in front of people, singing, dancing, all over the place, and it went beautifully, and everything went wonderful. So if what Jung is saying here is correct, it's like, okay, you've got this evolutionary way of behaving. And there are certain ways you can think and act and be that is way better for your survival, but it goes beyond that. And it's also general. So imagine you can survive in the fallen world as we are now. You can cope, we'll say, but then you can also lift yourself up for as much prosperous as possible. My rationality was not good enough to do that. The only thing that was good enough to do that was to trust in something else inside my head or outside of me that was going to take that fear away, to surrender myself into the life path that God had presented before me. That way of thinking, and to sincerely believe it, took away all of that fear and improved the quality of my life in that moment. It's like that is exactly this type of religious phenomenology, which is driving me towards that and making me more sympathetic with this type of thing. It's absolutely unbelievable to me, completely floored me. And this has happened a few times. If I get a craving for a cigarette or something, now I'll be like, I'll just sit down, close my eyes, and have a little pray. It's like the feeling of craving is lifted from you. It's like this upwards pull away. You don't feel it anymore. I'm like, thank you. And then you have to, like, thank. It's like, thank you so much for this. And like me talking to you now, people, is like, is that a real thing? I don't care. I don't care. I'm going to act as if God exists, in the words of Jordan Peterson, right? It's like, that's good enough. And to sincerely act as if he exists, like act as if he's there. And it seems to work. You know, so that way of thinking is way more beneficial than purely rationalizing and picking out different principles for yourself. It's like, no, you don't do it yourself. You trust in something else. That's the best way to do.
Well, I would like to add some personal antidotes based on respecting women. Because when you want to talk to a woman as a juicy young boyo, usually they're very beautiful. And there's an instinct in you where it's like, she is so beautiful, I'd love to have her. And if I fuck this up, I'm definitely going to lose this girl. So I got to be like on the top. And what happens is this little thought process starts ticking away in your mind, and you get filled full of anxiety because she's so valuable. She's so hot. And then you're just like, oh, Jesus Christ, am I good enough? Suddenly you start to create that pedestalizing effect where it's like, she's no longer is just like a hot girl. She starts to become the goddess in the moment. And you start to become this degenerate golem. And you're like, I will go up and say hello, and she'll be like, oh my God, it's Gollum. And she'll like pull out a gun. No, she'll scream and say, oh my God, save me. And everybody will come around with like a hammer and squish you. She's like, so this starts to play in your mind in a really subtle way, and it just manifests as fear. And what happens is your head starts thinking like mad. Your reason, your ego, your consciousness starts going, blah, 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 and then you start to find reasons. It's so funny. It's so funny listening to yourself do this or watching yourself do this, because you'll see the girl and you know that the instinct will go, you're like, she's hot, I want to talk to her. But then you'll be like, oh, she's walking a bit too fast, or she's not really, look, oh, her calf is a little bit too fat, she's not really my type, or she's she looks pissed off, or she's too far away, or oh look, I'm a bit tired, I'll talk to someone else, or something like that. You start to like try your best to escape it. You start rationalizing it, and the only way that I have found to overcome that fear is to actually just leap and go for it and have faith in. It's almost like something outside of myself. The way it worked for me when I started overcoming like these little kicks of fear was having faith in my emotions. I knew that if I jumped into it and it got in the moment and managed to make it through that little flash of kind of nervousness that you get, I would settle down, and then suddenly my personality would start to shine through, and I'd usually be kicked with adrenaline, so I'd be quite funny in that moment. And that was me putting faith in something that's not my ego. That's me putting in faith that's something not my reasoning mind, because your reasoning mind is actually deeply connected to your anxiety. It's really, really hard to separate those out. I found the same thing with performing on stage. If I had to go on stage and I waited, or if they were like, all right, you'll go on in 5 acts time, I'd be like, oh, for fuck's sake. You'd sit there, you'd watch everybody playing, someone would start doing really well, and you'd be like, I'm never going to, and you'd go in your head and you go fucking crazy. Whereas if I showed up and they were like straight on, I'd go in, I get that little flash of nervousness being like, oh fuck, there's like 50 people looking at me now. And then all of a sudden you get into the groove, and then you're as comfortable. It's like you're walking around your living room after a while. And it's all about that idea of you putting faith in something that's different than that little compartmentalized ego. And that's something I fear about the thing that Nietzsche presents. And I think this is why Nietzsche says people just don't get how serious he is. It's like, it's not like this, the whole idea of inventing beyond the good and even evil morals, of inventing new morals and new principles. You have to be unbelievably strong mentally to do that. You have to be so mentally powerful to do that, because your reasoning mind alone is your worst enemy when it comes to acting and living and all that stuff. And so in many senses, it's all about putting yourself outside your head. And this is why these psychological models like God work, or like the gods work. Like I see what people say with paganism. Like if you have to go fight, it might be quite useful for you to put your faith in someone like Ares and say, I give myself over to Ares or Odin right now. And that shuts off that stupid brain of yours. And in the Vikings used to describe it as going berserk. They get possessed by Odin and they tap into this side of themselves that could slaughter, that loved blood and something like that. And it's all about tapping into these psychological modes and giving yourself over to them. And that overcomes that vulnerability in humanity, which is this overthinking problem.
Yeah. It's what the hell was I going to respond to that? There's, I guess, somebody like Nietzsche or an atheist character. Well, I'm not even necessarily sure if Nietzsche was an atheist, as we consider atheists today.
He talked about God a lot.
Yeah, he might consider this to be like weakness. Be like, well, you have to put your faith in something else, and that will be a response which always comes up, and that comes from the ego. Hence, why when someone's egotistical, they have arrogance and self-belief. It's like, I can do this without God. And it's like, I'm actually not so sure about that. I'm really not so sure about that, because a lot of people are, and this triggers the atheists, I guess, but a lot of people are religious without knowing it. They don't say they believe in God, but they also kind of do. Like, there are so many different religious behaviors that you do, and the way that you go about your life on autopilot is dictated by these higher things like the self anyway. So you are religious whether or not you like it. So I'm not convinced that you can do it without God in your life. It's like, even the fact that mode of being, of putting your trust in something else, be that Ares, or be that the Christian God, or be that the wisdom of your ancestors looking out for you, like Mufasa in the sky or something. that might be the only way of conquering things like anxiety. Because I've had quite a few friends who've had like serious anxiety, and they talk to me on the phone for hours about this stuff, and I would never have a good answer. It's just like, well, just stop it. You know, it's not rational, or we're programmed to be feminine, something like that, something really obnoxious. It's like, maybe it should be just have faith. You know, something in an abstract sense, have faith. It's like, what makes you think that your rationality can do it by yourself? I'm really not so sure about that. It's like, I want to do a test on this, actually. I've just thought of that then.
Well, there's an easy test.
Well, I was just going to say, look at all the top speakers or something in the world who have anxiety and see what kind of habitual life that they lead. Have they got a meditation practice to them, a spiritual practice to them, something esoteric about them? That would be interesting to see.
I'm going to rag on Sam Harris here. I always do it. Would you follow Sam Harris in the battle? Or would you follow Conor McGregor, who wouldn't understand? He wouldn't know the profound truths that Sam has, the profound reasonable breakdowns of the world.
I might follow Sam to sit at a distance and then watch him get slaughtered. It'd be funny. Him just sort of walking in slow. We must be rational. And then he just gets stabbed by people.
By apes. It's interesting that there is this vulnerability to reason, and it can only be mastered by the psychological balancing of emotional intelligence. Like, people often talk about masculinity being all about logos or reason, and it is. But what's so fascinating about that is that the truly masculine character is able to take his emotions and break down their meaning properly so that he can actually experience them. Whereas the worst type of male you can ever come across, this is the Oedipal male, is someone who suppresses their emotions because they are not able to deal with them properly. They're weak psychologically. And what happens is their emotions dictate their logic. So they have this really advanced view of the world that's principled in all these emotional frames. And then say they have a political opinion where they hate Trump. And so you prod them on the Trump thing. They can't talk rationally about it because it's so emotionally charged. And so they get all fired up about it, and they end up getting they get this like weird inability to be human, like it's, or to be rational. They love rationality, but they can't be rational because their emotions are bullying them around because they can't deal with their emotions. And then the very worst version of this is someone who emotionally castrates themselves because this problem fucks up their reason. So what they do is they're like, all right, I'll just completely cut my emotions out of my personality. And then you have Sam Harris, who's someone who can rationalize very well but can't give you any insights into the human experience because they're essentially just a robot. They're just a prefrontal cortex just sitting there talking to you, and they have no deeper personality, you know. And it's fascinating, man. I rag on Sam Harris so much in these videos.
I think Sam Harris is like incredibly intelligent. He was never my favorite of the Four Horsemen, though, when I was really into atheism. Also, I can never really understand why people were into Dan Dennett, one of the other ones. It's like, he's just like an old dude, doesn't say anything. I know, like, Richard Dawkins was the shit, and then Christopher Hitchens, of course. But then God stole his voice by giving him esophageal cancer, which is it's horrendous. But that metaphor, it just, you know, I'm not even convinced that Sam Harris's rationality is rational itself. This is going to sound weird. It's like, he says, in many ways, he's presenting himself to be a moral paragon, and he might not intend it like this, but it's like, I'm broken free from the matrix, and I'm purely rational, and most other people aren't, and I'm motivated by nothing but goodness to save mankind. Yeah, it's like, I don't believe that for a second. It's like, there are going to be other things dictating your rational front that you aren't aware of. I mean, we are aware there are other forces in the head. It's like, well, I'm rational. It's like, okay, the self doesn't exist anymore. He's disproven Jungian psychology. Everyone give him a medal. He's a genius.
He's the Messiah. He was exposed. The entire 10 hours he spent with Jordan Peterson were a complete waste of time. The last 5 minutes were probably the most insightful minutes of that entire thing. And it was when Douglas Murray I like a lot. He's a very smart and very psychologically sophisticated dude, I feel. Douglas Murray turns around to Sam and Jordan and says, what's your conception of evil? And Jordan, this is why Jordan is Jordan has got a strong character. Jordan has done this. Jordan is the real deal. And you can feel it off him. You know he is trying his best to be a soulful person, and Jordan has a strong soul, and this is why I really like him. He kind of annoys me a little bit, but like, I can put that aside. I think he'd be a fantastic person to sit down and talk to because he has that in him. He has a soul, and Jordan gives this really deep, visceral response to what evil is, and he says, evil is the part of myself that could be a Nazi prison guard. And I knew that he had spent a long time contemplating the ability for him to break someone's neck and love it, and just love feeling that crunch. Like he had that in him. He had done that shadow work, if you will. And so he had a depth to his personality, and it was beyond his reason. He couldn't reason why that happened. He knew that it was a part of himself. He knew he was a tyrant monster somewhere deep down. So I was like, that was a great response. It flips over to Sam, and Sam just goes off in this utterly, like, completely castrated, just intellectual masturbation about not being present or something like that. Like the fact that evil is the thing that takes you away from presence. And you could tell that he had never done anything severely psychologically sophisticated with himself, and he just got exposed in that moment. And I was like, damn, I just saw it there. And I don't dislike Sam. Like I kind of think he's a cool guy, and I would love to talk to him as well. Like I'm sure you could get a conversation out of him, but he does lack that, and he can't be a moral authority if you can't deal with evil. Truly, like that's actually the fundamental definition: is what is the soul of cruelty, brutality, and that those really dark things, and the energy in you that is willing to do them. What would be the part of you that would be able to go berserk and take, like Nietzsche describes this. He says that the soul, almost this innocent soul of all the barbaric Vikings, was that they could walk into a village completely independent of Christian morality. They could walk into a village, take out their swords, murder every single monk, and rape every single woman in there, and come away from it like they just did a college prank. You know, they could come away with that it was almost childlike innocence from just how unbelievably intense that would have been to be one of those women or one of those men, to just get utterly cruelly violated like that. But he is like, no, that's there's something deep in us that's able to do that. There's something deeply animalistic about us, our savage nature. And that's in a weird way, that's the like part of the best part of us. That savage nature is the thing that builds the Roman Empire. But the modern people are like trying to castrate that out of them, and the paradox of life is accessing that, understanding it, but also somehow capping that off with a sophisticated, principled way of living on top of that. It's a very hard problem. It's a very hard problem.
No, it's incredibly difficult, and okay, it's difficult, but then at the same time, I know for a fact Sam Harris is not the way to go. It's, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, anyway. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's like Sam Harris seems to equate rationality with goodness. It's like that you can't be good unless you are rational, unless it's a freak accident, right? So rationality equals goodness, and the underlying principle is well-being, something like that. In which case, he would have agreed with Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, which is exactly Jordan's point. So of course you can rationalize killing somebody. So it's like, that's the God you want. We'll just put rationality in the space of God. That's what you want. Okay, fine. It's not a sophisticated answer, though. I mean, I understand his concerns with religion, we'll say. But it's like, no. Like, why go to Sam Harris when you can go to Carl Jung? And in many ways, that's an ad hominem attack. But it's like, seriously. Like, that's a real point. Like, go into the depths of the psyche that's been elucidated before you, the real way how humans work. Or it's moral landscape. No, I don't want the moral landscape. I want Jung.
Compassion.
Yeah, it's like, no, they're just abstract terms. But of course, he's a quiet man, and he says we must all love each other. It's like that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen.
One of the best things about Sam Harris is he's like, look, I actually, like, I'm really into compassion. And then in like 2 sentences later, he'd be like, but we've really got to sort out these Palestinians because the state of Israel is getting crushed. And you're like, oh, okay. Interesting, Sam. Interesting how far your compassion goes. And it's that thing, like people are all full of ideals till it comes down to the dirty nitty grits of like what would you do if you had to fight in a war and take life? Like what do you do about that? And you could be like, I'd be able to reasonably explain to myself why I have to do it. And it's like, you wouldn't, man. You'd have to start appealing to symbols at some point. Like, and this is where it becomes very, very hardcore, is that if you had to fight for, if you were, say that the Allies were fighting against communism, say that war broke out in Europe after World War II. And that was the literally the war for, oh my God, these communists are going to take over all of Europe and create a prison camp for the rest of existence. And you had to go and you had to just literally churn through hundreds of brainwashed Russian soldiers. Like, how do you say it to yourself? Because you know that they're brainwashed, but you know they're still people. And you kill them. And then what happens? This is always what happens. People get post-traumatic stress disorder. They say, and they describe it viscerally as, I was not myself. What happened is I went out there with this gun and I started taking lives, and it was like I was watching myself do it. It was an outer body experience, and I was possessed by, I was evil. I was that touching power of cruelty, and I was it. And it can fuck with people because they're like, wait a second, so that's in me, and I gave that power, and it became me. And I was possessed. It's the berserker myth. And it did stuff. Does that mean it can just come out at random whenever it wants? Am I possessed by a demon? And then they come back home and then they're sitting around there and they'll suddenly get into this cycle of violent thoughts, and they'll get this urge to start killing people and stuff. And then they'll freak out and they'll be like, oh my God, was it about to take over me? And then, like, I was reading all these stories about them, and this is what's going on in their head. And they're like, what do I do about that? And like, the only way you can solve it seems to be religious. They always describe it religiously. They're like, I was possessed by demons. I was possessed by, and it's all to do with that. And it comes down to that symbol. It comes down to what Jung is saying here, is that the psychological, phenomenological way of describing these experiences is more sophisticated than more compassion, you know?
Oh yeah.
And that's something that people need to get drilled into their head, is that, all right, it's cool for you to sit up there on stage and tell people how morality works, but go take someone's life, you know, go do that and see what you, don't go do that for fuck's sake. But you know what I mean? Like, you don't know until you've really confronted these really, really hard truths. You don't know till you've sat down with a PTSD soldier and explained to them or listened to their story and their reality. And it's a very hard problem, very hard problem.
As far as I'm concerned, rationality doesn't solve your problems. It just waves them away and tries to explain them in the light of rationality. I will occasionally get an urge. I won't give details on air because we have private lives, right? But it's like I've had an urge fairly recently, and I don't know where it came from, to destroy everything that I own and build. So like my relationship, gone. PhD, gone. Everything I love and cherish. Why don't I just absolutely destroy it? And do you know what the emotion was underneath? It wasn't for the sake of it. It was because I'd get such a thrill out of it. I am the boss. And I actually started to do it. And I saw the world begin to unravel. This caused me such distress afterwards. But the world started to unravel. And the amount of, like, we'll say, tears and emotion from other people was unbelievable. And I didn't catch myself and be like, oh, what am I doing? I'm so irrational. I must go back to being rational, like our God Sam says. It was nothing like that. It was like a part of me died, and I like crumpled into like this like depressed heap, as if like the demon had possessed me and then left. It was like, now clean up the mess.
Yes.
So it wasn't rationality that cleaned it up. There was a part of me that the demon decided to let me go in that moment. That's the way of conceptualizing it. I know, Stefan, you've done shadow work like that too, but it's like, that's the real deal. That's what underlies your life, good and evil, these different wills, these different forces. Rationality doesn't play into it. It's like a tiny player compared to this stuff.
I actually think the problem is less about rationality not playing into it, more the way that you conceptualize rationality. If you turn rationality into a god, you end up getting cooked by these powers, and then that's when, like, it's almost like the way the male feminists will be like, I love women, I respect them the most, and then it turns out that they're like a fucking degenerate sex pedophile or some shit like that. Like, it's always that case. It's always like you act one way, but in reality, because you're not psychologically sophisticated, when the pressure's on, you completely are dominated by another force, which is way more sinister always. Whereas rationality, I've noticed, is connected to the idea of the logos. And just being purely led by your emotions is a very dangerous thing, because you will go into those destructive states and just get possessed by them and all that. And from my understanding of doing shadow work, and dreams taught me this, is that the thing is that if you think rationality is the reality, you'll fuck up. What you need to understand is that there is a logic to your emotions, but it's almost like separate from the real world. It's really hard to get your head around this, is that it's almost like the way you read dreams and the way you understand how dreams work is teaching you how the psyche plays with itself. It's all about association, irony, hidden meanings, figuring out the emotional intention behind things. And if you can apply your logos, your rationality to that, you can begin to understand what these forces want. And you can then look at the way you behave in a different way. It flips your mode of thinking to a new mode of thinking. And so when you start to get this urge to destroy stuff, there is, if you've trained this well enough, there's a chance that you can catch yourself with your logos and understand, oh shit, I'm expressing a desire for this, but it's actually desiring this. It's the logic of that emotion, as opposed to the way you rationalize what you're doing. You're able to turn that reason in on the instinct that's coming out and understand it. You apply meaning to the emotion, and that actually teaches you how to do it properly. I would consider this emotional intelligence. I consider it connected to rational intelligence, and that's I think this is actually quite a solid frame I'm putting forward, because there's some evidence that the higher your IQ is, the better you are at dealing with trauma, meaning that you're able to add meaning to your trauma better. You're able to understand your emotions better because you've just got that ability to use your mind better. So if you can do this properly, you can solve your traumas a lot easier than someone who gets overwhelmed by the complexity of them. And that would be my frame, is that rationality has a place. Otherwise it wouldn't be there, but it has to be used well. And I just don't think people know how to use it well. I would say that's what I'm saying with Sam, is that when it came out of Sam, he was forced to confront a deep instinct, which is evil, cruelty. It showed me that Jordan had done it. Like I connected with Jordan. I was like, he gets it, he gets it, dude. Whereas Sam, I was like, no. And you just know it. It's so instinctive. You're like, that person doesn't know themselves. It just boils down to that. So
yeah. So I guess on what you were saying, I think that's completely spot on. So if I conceptualize it as like there was me, my ego, whatever, and then I'm being confronted by evil spirits and evil demons, it's like, how am I going to fight them away would be the big question. And it wasn't like, I am so smart and I am smarter than emotions. Poof. Which is, I guess, by rationality, that's what I would mean. But I think you're absolutely spot on. It's like, I need a proper sword that actually works against it. Yes. Not just emotions do not exist. All that matters and all that is good is the words that are in my head. It's like you need to like something like, and maybe it has to be through experience. It's the only way I've been able to do it. It's through actual experience and getting to know yourself in a way. It's like, it's almost like you've got to, in your own brain, forge that sword through confronting it before, so the sword fits into the slot in the demon's neck, something like that. So it actually is a proper fit, and you're like, "Be gone, Satan!" And then Satan falls into a million pieces. Like that's the only way I can think of doing it. It's not just emotions are part of my animal mind, and I'm better. No,
and this is what Jung says. Jung says it's about unifying the opposites. You have your eros, your emotions, your instincts, and you have your logos, your reason, and your logic, and people will worship one, or they'll worship the other. They'll worship their hedonistic instincts, or they'll worship their castrated logic. But the idea is that, can you add logic to your instinct? Can you learn the logic of your instincts? And then that will teach you how to think properly, because then you're able to go into, like, you can't do any meaningful thinking if you cannot confront your emotions. Like, when you get to the bounds of your understanding of the world, you will hit emotional probe points, because it'll become too difficult. It's too difficult to think, is the earth flat? Because that involves an emotional head fuck that is so big that what you will do is you'll reason yourself that it's bullshit, because you actually can't face the emotional ability to say, oh my God, what if everybody's lied to me in my whole life? And then if you're the opposite, you will fall into that and completely say it's definitely true, because you don't really trust the world. So it's all about emotional intelligence in those really fringe areas. And that's a big question. It's like, well, if you're going to listen to people who are super reasonable, but they don't have the emotional intelligence to confront this shit, like, you're sort of in a problem zone. So it's about a unification, as Jung said, because Jung was a fucking G.
Yes. This was a very nice lecture. I enjoyed it. Should we take questions? Because I've got to bounce in about 10 minutes.
Yes, quite. People, hit us up with questions as fast as you can because James got to go before 5. He's I think he's going to go on a berserker. He's going to invade a village and slaughter all the inhabitants, take their Christian crosses and smelt them down into the hammers of Thor. So
you heard it here first. When it's on the news later, you know exactly who did it.
Yeah, this would be like the lecture that made a man spiral. So give us questions. I'll run quickly through them, and then we'll talk later, peeps. We'll talk later. Carl Jung depth psychology. How we doing, people? Pablo, how you doing? Reality Quest, how you doing? It is not a question of pretending or believing. This issue is understanding how things really work. That would be on the phenomenological truth. Yeah, see, there is a possibility that this is the way to look at the world. I'm not rubbing that off the table, but I guess just to make it as based and pragmatic as possible, maybe there is even if the world is this materialistic dead zone, perhaps adding in that phenomenological touch is still useful enough for some people who are doubtful, and that's the important thing.
Yeah.
Religious statements without exception have to do with the reality of the psyche and not with the reality of the physics. Answer the job. Yeah, that's Jung himself.
Yes, indeed.
The reason people get so wrapped around the crank about God is because organized religion wants you to believe in the physical reality of its teachings. Yep. The idea of good beyond your stupid rationality is a very good one. Of going beyond your stupid rationality is a very good one. I love how you were doing that. Yeah, maybe I just don't have rationality. That could be the other problem. You were right, James. This is Carl Jung depths. I think this is Skip. How are you doing, Skip?
Hey, Skip.
You're right, James. You can't do it without a God in your life. And you're right. It can be Aries or your dead grandfather. It's not rational, but it is.
Indeed. Spooky stuff, but you get sort of like you get a visceral feeling of that's on the money. You know, it just feels right. Phenomenological. Feels right.
Here we go, James, from Pablo. Studio. Why all the hate for Sam Harris, James?
Well, and Stefan, thank you very much.
Why all the hate for Sam Harris? I think I'm straw manning Sam Harris and turning him into this neutered cycle. I'm straw manning him and turning him into this neutered, overly rational hamster. So I make it as if his brain, if his entire personality is just like meaningless talking about words. I know that a lot of people find him like a very meaningful person, and he does actually have really, really based principles. Like, for example, Jordan Peterson, as much as I'm like, bowing down to him here and saying he's a great, sophisticated psychological man, when Patreon killed off Sargon of Akkad, Sam Harris was very fast in sticking by his principles, whereas Jordan was like, oh, well, like, it's not obvious that like I can just stop getting money, so I'll like take a month and me and Dave will talk about it. Me and Dave will sit down and we'll talk about it, and like, it's very bad. And then Sam was like, yeah, I'm off, dude. Like, what the fuck? So Sam obviously is a principled guy, and he has a so I'm just being a dick. He's a good symbol for what I'm trying to talk about, which is the overly rational person, because he's got a sort of flat personality. But I'm being a little bit mean here as well. But nonetheless, I will keep insulting him and using him as that straw man, because, yeah, it's just the way I'm going to have to do things. If I find someone better, though, I'll go for it.
Yeah, I don't hate Sam Harris at all as an individual. The thing with Sam is, like, he is the figurehead of the rationality atheism movement. Whether or not he's there voluntarily or not, I mean, he is there voluntarily. So it's like I get to criticize him. And as far as I'm concerned, his arguments are not sophisticated enough. So it's like, how could you possibly write book after book after book demolishing religion without addressing Carl Jung? So it's not as if Carl Jung's unknown. It's not as if he's wrong. It's like, why would you not address that? Or even the apologists like Dostoevsky or Kierkegaard or anyone like that. It's like, nope, he doesn't address them as far as I'm aware. So it's like you don't get to be on equal footing with all these other intellectual people. So it doesn't exist. You aren't there in my mind. I appreciate your effort, but you haven't addressed the actual real concerns.
Yeah, that's it. Like, and I think this is something that we talked about in previous episodes. It's extremely important that people are highly highly serious about who they pedestalize as intellectuals. Like if we pedestalize bad intellectuals, as I said, if you pedestalize Karl Marx, it causes the deaths. The wrong memes will kill millions of people. Like, as I said, if we went to war with Russia after World War II, and the generals were talking about this, the generals were like, the Americans made it to Berlin and they stopped outside Berlin. And Patton, one of the generals, was like, why have we stopped? The Russians went in, they raped millions of German women. Apparently, some women were raped 70 times, up to 70 times. Patton was like, we should have kept going. We should have pushed all the way to Moscow because those Russians were monsters. And if you got to that point where you had to go kill people, you were facing an entire civilization of people who were brainwashed by the Marxist movement. And they were hardcore, man. Like, you should read the stories about how they used to brainwash the kids. They'd send them out into the fields picking up potatoes or some shit like that, saying that the Americans had dropped poison in them or some crazy shit. And it was just crazy the levels they go to convince people that to indoctrinate them, you know. And so it's that idea of like, you pick Marx, this is what happens. You really can't get that wrong. And so these people who put themselves forward, they sort of like, oh, why are you being so hard and criticizing me so much? It's like, look, man, you sort of have to take that, you know. If you're the real deal, you'll be able to take a serious amount of criticism. Like, Nietzsche's hard to criticize. Nietzsche's a fucking animal. And I don't think he's completely right, but at the same time, I find it hard to prove him wrong. And he's exactly the right type of person you should have there. He's so good. He's so smart that he's literally impossible to just dismiss the way you can dismiss Sam Harris. And the same as with Jung. Like, Jung is just fucking mind-blowing. And you can see it from doing this. You can't just like, you know, one punch strike him the way you can sort of say Sam Harris clearly isn't psychologically sophisticated. It's like, once you actually dig into Jung, you're like, oh my God, this guy's fucking me up properly. So if you're not good enough to be the leader of the basketball team, you gotta accept at some point. And it doesn't mean people hate you. It just means that you're getting exposed in the way. And this is easy for me to say, but if I ever got put in a public position, I guaranteed I'd hate it too. It'd be horrible because no one likes getting criticized, but it's just the way of the game, man. Just the way of the game. James, I know you're a bit pressed for time, but tell the boys to just fucking wait for a bit and we'll get a few more of them. Okay, guys, I'm going to have to skip through some of the statements. You can't be a moral authority if you can't deal with evil. Yes, it's true. Great quotes coming from you both. Need to stay in the flow now, but go back to these videos and write down the pearls you're expressing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Skip. This is where it becomes very hardcore. Why did dear old dad never want to talk about his experiences in the war? My father-in-law would only talk about his World War II experiences with me because women in his family could never understand what was happening all the time. Yeah, it's a very intense male experience. Men generally are the ones who have to go off and get ripped apart by bullets and exploded by mortars and die for their country. So it's a very strange thing. Okay, here we go. Questions. They say that prayer is when you talk to God and meditation when you listen to God. Centro Americano.
Yeah, it could be actually. I was actually thinking that there is no meditation in Christianity when all the self-help types, all the young men who try and make their lives better, it's what? Cold showers, go to bed on time, wash your genitals, and then meditate, right? And I was like, this is weird. Why is there no meditation in Christianity? Yes, there is. It's called prayer. It's just generally prayer is not particularly sophisticated. Like when I was growing up a Catholic, I would have the Hail Mary stuck on the wall, and my mum would be like, say the Hail Mary before you go to sleep. Like, Hail Mary for the grace, Lord is with thee. And it's like, it wouldn't be sophisticated. But as I've been doing it recently, it's like, I will focus. It's like deep focus and listen to what's there and sincerely speak words in my head that matter. I think it's a more sophisticated type of meditation, though I think classic meditation conveys benefits that prayer won't necessarily bring you, like complete stillness of mind. Like meditation clears your mind, whereas prayer focuses you, I'd say.
You know, there's actually a lot of different types of meditation, and prayer is simply one of them. Prayer, I've noticed, if you do it right, puts your head into a frame of gratitude. Because if you think about the Our Father who art in heaven, it's pretty much like, thank you, Big G, for all the shit you've given us. You're a class. Keep it up there. We'll keep it up down here. And it's like once you contemplate what you're doing, you're actually sitting there being like, thank you, God. So it's a thank you. Gratitude's a very, very positive emotion. It's really, really healthy for your head. Tony Robbins talks about the fact that if you focus on gratitude, your heart and your brain start to vibe in sync, which is astounding. Whereas if you focus on fear, they actually go in different rates. Yeah, anger and fear apparently shut off your prefrontal cortex and flick your heart into overdrive. So gratitude calms that down. So that's an astounding idea. There's many types of meditation, such as loving kindness, which is a very common one. That's what Buddha said. Buddha said you should just focus on loving kindness. And that's actually just gratitude in many ways, but it's a different one. He said the ultimate meditation for a Buddhist is to think of compassion for the whole world. So that's about making yourself more empathetic. It's slightly different than prayer. It's still very effective though. And gratitude is the one they focus on Christianity. Loving kindness is the one they focus on in Buddhism. It's snowing right now, Pablo. I'll show you out the window if you wish.
Okay, I mentioned really quick about Tony Robbins. His meditation is fascinating because he was saying, and he even looked a bit embarrassed in front of journalists saying this, but he said, what I do is I stand up and I close my eyes and I thank the world for all the people that I love. And then what I do is I imagine and I will this beautiful love for me spewing out, wrapping around my body and spreading out into the world to all the people who I care about, touching them and bringing them good fortune. It's like, you're talking about the Holy Spirit, whether or not you like it or not. That's the Holy Spirit. And it doesn't come from you. It comes from, I guess, the other part of you, right? The self, God. So it's like, he is basically Jesus Christ in that moment. He imagined himself to be. She's like, oh, okay, carry on.
I've noticed that with Buddhism is that it pushes you into a lot of those places. Now, the meditation that people think about of focus is slightly different. I don't see anything like that in Christianity. That's a more sophisticated tool. That's where if you sit down and when your mind wanders, you pull it back to your breath. That's a really, really cool meditation. I've done it before. Highly valuable. I recommend people try it. But generally speaking, it's not seen in Christianity much. The prayer is functional, but in a different way. I actually quite like prayer because it's gratitude pretty much, and it's more natural than the Buddhist way of doing it because I'm Western, so I'm just like a bit more kind of like go-getter, and I'll be like, all right, I'll sit down and just do a quick prayer there, get in touch with gratitude, and then I'll fuck off back into my life. I think meditation is very dangerous when you get into that whole I'm going to go up all the levels and become enlightened. And Yuri Bezmenov's talked about this. He said that the Marxists actually brainwashed a load of Indians in order to use them to brainwash the Americans into getting into meditation and the yoga and all the Indian traditions, but these really castrated versions of this in order to demoralize the American people. And I've noticed that it's like a new religion over there in the States, and it's spread over to Ireland as well, where people become like basic bitches and get all into like India and yoga and Kundalini and meditation and all this shit. And they end up becoming just like retards and don't really understand anything about reality. And Yuri's just laughing at them, being like, they're utter useful idiots. They think they're solving the problems. They're actually deluding themselves and vanishing off to somewhere else. So I think that's really important to get that balancing perspective. Know that the Russians were using that as a way to fuck with your head. And if you're falling for that, well, just make sure you're not being an idiot.
All right, I'm gonna bounce now, but you can carry on, so I can just leave.
Tell those fuckers to fuck off. You got 4 great questions here. 4 great questions. I'll give you one, and then the rest of them are about dreams. I'll do the dream ones.
Okay, cool.
Okay. What are the base level principles other than truthful speech? John Todd.
This is a really difficult one. This is really difficult because as Christianity exploded, I guess, from Christ, if you read the Bible and it's just Christ, he's not saying that much. Like, he's not got a whole rule book for you. He's basically a bunch of parables. The thing with parables is they're metaphorical truth. You can pull out from what you want. But then maybe the people don't like the church very much. It's hard to get in because it's incredibly complicated. And you've got a million different pieces of theology. Like trying to think about the Trinity people have like killed themselves over that as to what that really means, and the incarnation and transubstantiation. It's like, what the hell is all this? So it is a question of what the hell those principles are, and it's like, at what resolution do you take them? Because obviously you could say a good principle for everyone is go to bed on time. It's like, yeah, but is that the principle? You know, it's like, I can't give a straight answer, but what I can direct you towards the answer, because I'm still on that journey myself. It's like, whatever the destiny which you see before yourself, the path which you know that you truly want to, and not just want, but need to go down. If you pick apart the things that you need to do or not do to get there, that's the principles you should live your life by. Now, the transpersonal ones like truthful speech have to be a part of that, or else you psychologically fall apart. It absolutely has to. But you will also come across certain things as well which you do not cuck on no matter what. And then you can start building them up so that they're less foundational and more like, if I say I'm going to do something, like I'm going to become a master at my craft, I do it, and that becomes a principle of yours, and you start building them up and up and up and up and up. But it begins with that truthful speech as the one and only foundational one, because it's truthful speech to me and you, whoever's listening, to me and Stefan, and also you and your head. It's like you have to communicate honestly with yourself. You have to listen to what it says. And then whatever pact you make with yourself or the forces in your head, you break it no matter what. So that's how you can extend that truthful speech to everything. But then, of course, you have to build other principles into your life too to reach the goals that you want. You can't just walk around being truthful all the time. You have to have other things in your life too. So that would be my answer to that question.
Based as fuck. That's dead right. It's so important to have that truthful relationship with yourself. I think that's probably the dominant one, is that people talk about not lying in reality. Definitely, try your best to avoid lying. Try your best to be honest. Try your best to be as authentic and real as you can. But we know that you will fail on that at some point, and your head will punish you for that. And that's all cool. Like, it's part of growing up, part of learning. But the most important place is to learn how to have truthful speech with yourself, because it's so hard, man. Like when you pick up that second cigarette and you're like, sure, like it's not a big deal. So yeah, but you're lying. You said you wouldn't, and now you're doing it. And you have to say that to yourself. In many ways, it's possible. It's only possible to redeem yourself, to get true forgiveness, the true redemption, by having that within your head. That's where it really matters. So that you can, because the reason why you don't want to admit stuff to yourself is because you'll feel shame and it hurts, which is so funny, because all it is shame. And you're like, I don't want to feel that shame because it'll hurt. And so you try to avoid it. It's astounding. And James, I'm going to let you bounce. And then
one final thing on that.
You want to talk more now? Well, no, just go fuck off your little boyfriends there. Come on.
Well, I actually said no. That's the thing. I said I would be there at 5, and look at you. I'm cucking on my word. Thank you very much. It actually made me forget the last thing I was going to say. So fuck it. I'll say it next time. Thank you, people. I really appreciate you tuning in. Love you very much. And of course, love you too, Stefan. We'll do this again next week.
Jimmy Boyo, I'll talk to you later. Thank you for popping in, people. Let's cover this. Jimmy Boyo, bye-bye. Someone asked me about the cold. This literally started happening in the last half an hour.